So everybody welcome Brandon.
I'm an alcoholic. My name is Brandon. My sobriety date is January the 9th, 1999. I'm really grateful for that, and so are some other people. My favorite page in the big book is page 62. Specifically in the middle of page 62, it says we had to have God. This is the how and why of it. And I have found that in the last 22 years, as long as I can remember that and seek that, not only is it going to be okay, honey, it already is. So where to begin? I had to sign a waiver that I could be recorded. So I got to be careful what I talk about. I grew up in Huntsville, Texas. Y'all know where Huntsville is? Alcoholics and addicts tend to know. They know, yeah. It's a company town, and my dad worked for that company. By the time he retired, he was on the parole board. And so I grew up on the other side of that, right? And I have a little brother who is 2 years younger than I am, and he and I grew up in a pretty upper middle class family. We had everything we ever wanted. I had a car when I was 16. I got another one the day I graduated from high school, and there was a trust fund set aside due to some stuff that happened when I was a baby. I had everything I ever wanted, right? And it was never enough. And it didn't start then, that started way earlier, right? I was one of those kids that was on the outside looking in. And after a while, I told myself that if y'all knew who I really was, you wouldn't even let me in, right? I had convinced myself of that. And that's a scary place to be. And this was, late 80s, early 90s, and I was, realizing I was probably gay, and I really didn't know what all that meant, but everyone I saw who was gay on TV who had AIDS and was dying. And it was not pretty back then, and I was convinced that was what was gonna happen to me, and that my family was gonna throw me out. They didn't. Just a life of sadness and sorrow. That's what I was convinced was ahead of me. So I started wearing a lot of black and listening to The Cure. You laugh, but it's true. And by the time I was 13 years old, I was getting out of a psychiatric hospital after 2 months for an attempted suicide, And that was around the time I started drinking, and I feel like I needed a drink by then. I got into my mom and dad's liquor cabinet as soon as I got home, and I stole some of their cigarettes and started having relations with the boy who lived next door, who was the same age as I was, right? And again, I thought I needed a drink. So, the next several years, I think they're kind of normal, if they're, if I can never define what that is. It's a lot of, figuring out, kind of what I can get away with, what's fun, what do I like, kind of deal. And, of course, being underage, drugs came in there as well. And, I just really want to clarify something real quick. The Big Book says, in the doctor's opinion, alcohol comes in many forms. And in my first Big Book, I wrote on the side, drugs. Drugs count here too. I like to write in the margins, so my sponsees will tell you that, because I point it out to them every time we go through that one. So, the boy who lived across the street, his name was Chris, and I was 17 years old, and I had skipped the 11th grade, so I was going into my last semester of high school, and Chris was the same age as I was, and he was murdered. He was beaten to death in his front driveway by another student, right? And this was 10, 11 o'clock at night, and my mother is a nurse, and this was the mid-90s, right? So there was no such thing as being an out kid in high school, but Chris's girlfriend found him and knew that my mom was a nurse, and anyways, it was late, and she was the one doing CPR, and she rode with his parents to the hospital, and she was the one that called me about an hour and a half later and said he was gone. And what happened in that moment is, my first relationship had ended abruptly. It was not a healthy relationship, and I didn't have anywhere to turn to or anyone to tell. This just happened, and I'm really sad. And so what I used to say a lot, and still do to this day, is that Chris died and I stayed high and drunk for the next 3 years. And that's exactly what I did. I went on and graduated from high school and moved away 3 hours to go to college. And about 2 weeks into that first semester of college, I got access to a trust fund. And the end of that semester, Sam Houston State University invited me to not come back. They said, why don't you just go home, go to community college for a while, maybe this isn't your jam. And so I went home and did the same thing that I'd been doing down there, right, because I'm living in Austin now, and having the same results. Only this time, I failed all of my classes. And my parents said, maybe college isn't your thing. Why don't you take some time off? Why don't you work? And so, I started waiting tables at the local Cracker Barrel and thought I had it made. I didn't. There's a line in the big book. It says, in Bill's story on page 5, gradually things got worse, and that's exactly what happened. Gradually things got worse, right? And I don't need to go into war stories or anything, but what I can tell you is that by the time I got sober at 20 years old, I had done everything I said I would never do. And that includes, lying, cheating, and stealing, and everything I said I would never do, right? And I justified all of it. So, my best friend at the time, her name was Michelle, she had gotten into some legal trouble again and again and again and found herself in court-mandated treatment in Georgetown, Texas. And I was invited to go visit her on a family visit day. We're not family, right? But I made that entire thing about me. I had 1 day sober. I didn't know that I was going to have 1 day sober that day. I was completely strung out. I had not slept for maybe more than 40 minutes in the past 2 or 3 days. And I'd been chain smoking Newport 100s, so I smelled like an ashtray. It wasn't pretty, y'all. But that was January of 1999, right? And Michelle's mother was in that same group, and she had been on a bowling league for the past 5 years with a woman named Beth. And Beth had 5 years sober and another 12-step program. And she called that woman and she said, I think Brandon might be ready. Can I give him your number? And that's how this thing happens, y'all. When people see us out in the world, living by spiritual principles, doing the next right thing for the next right reason, when someone else comes along in their life that has a problem, maybe we can be the one that can help them, And so I was 12-stepped into this program. I called this woman and I said, I think I have a problem. Can you help me? And she said, I sure can. Why don't we meet at this parking lot? Because she wasn't about to invite me over to her house. Why don't we meet at this parking lot and I'll take you to an NA meeting? And I said, all right, sure. And that's where my recovery began, And again, I was 20 years old. I did not know what to expect, and I had no idea what was in front of me. And I am so grateful for that day and that first meeting and the people who just welcomed me and embraced me. That woman, Beth, carried a message of depth and weight to me on the way to that first meeting, And she talked about things that I really didn't understand about how they'd been praying for me, about how people gather up at the end of the meeting and they have a moment of silence for those of us that are out there suffering, and that I was one of those people they had been praying for. And I got really uncomfortable with that, because I didn't know a whole lot about religion. I knew about messages I had received from the media. I grew up in a very non-religious family. There's like a little mixture of Southern Baptists and Catholics and Jews in my family, and I'm just like, I don't know, By then, I really didn't know what was in front of me, right? It was just kind of a pick and choose deal. But I was really uncomfortable whenever anyone told me they were praying for me. really uncomfortable with that stuff. But I said, okay, you know, just nodded and smiled, right? And what ended up happening is my life just completely opened in front of me. I found a sponsor, I found a home group, I got to be of service, and I worked steps. And as a result, I didn't get high and I didn't get drunk, even when I turned 21, 8 months later. In fact, there was a group of us that were under 21, and we were loud and obnoxious, and there was this young people's meeting that we would go to on Sunday nights in Austin called Regeneration X. And my 21st birthday was on a Sunday, and so we went to that meeting, and then we all went dancing, and I just remember Front 242 and 9 Inch Nails being played, and it was just like, this is better than getting drunk. I'm okay with this today, you know? But it was this thing of I was so terrified that if I picked up, I would die that first year that I did whatever y'all told me to do, right? And since then, it hasn't been a thing of I'm scared I'm gonna die if I pick up. I'm scared I'm not gonna die. I'm scared I'm gonna have to crawl back in here. And I've got way too much ego to do that. I like to joke with some people that I stay sober because there are certain people I don't want them to have more time than me. Y'all, I'm not kidding. I'm not. So, you know, I can do all things through spite, which gives me strength. And, you know, and thank God for that, right? Because sometimes those defects of character can be turned into assets. Not sometimes, all the time. So like I said, I did what I was told to do and was doing this still, right? And in that process, I started working a big boy job for the state of Texas. And I was with the state for, gosh, over 11 years, right? And it was with the Department of Criminal Justice. And I went back to college. You know, I had the opportunity to go back to college and to really focus on school. And I'm grateful for that opportunity. I am not grateful for the amount of student debt that I incurred, but I'm grateful for the degree I got and the ability to pay off those student loans. And for President Biden for signing that thing to where, you know, we don't have to pay any payments until next year. So, but side note. I did what I was told to do, and I had a life develop in front of me that was absolutely beautiful and gorgeous and amazing. And somewhere along the way, I stopped paying attention. I stopped sponsoring people. I stopped going to my home group and being a part of my home group. I stopped reaching out to newcomers unless I thought they were cute and I could sleep with them. I stopped being of service. I stopped putting money in the Southern Tradition basket. And I got really sick. Really, really sick. And what ended up happening is I put a wall around myself in front of everyone that was close to me. And I would only give people bits and pieces of what was really going on. No one ever had the full truth. They just had bits and pieces. And I lived in that bitter morass of self-pity. At 10 years sober. What I know today is I was living in untreated alcoholism. But at that point, I just thought I was insane and that I was gearing up for a relapse, you know? Because back up to when I was a newcomer and that first sponsor, I was told that I had to go to the Lambda group of Alcoholics Anonymous in Austin, Texas, at least once a week. And I said, I'm not an alcoholic. She said, but you are, Blanche, you know? And she also said when you go to an AA meeting, you call yourself an alcoholic and you talk about being sober. You need to be respectful of the traditions. And so I did that. And in that process, I got to know some people at the Lambda Austin group really well, because even though that individual stopped being my sponsor after 2 years, I continued going to Lambda. And I continued to build friendships, you know? And I met some amazing people there, and I'm looking at one of them right now. And what ended up happening is by the time I was knee-deep in untreated alcoholism, absolutely miserable, had not been to a meeting in a while, had not worked a step in over a year, I wanted to drink, and I couldn't understand why. You know, it's like I can justify a glass of wine, probably. Couldn't justify any cocaine, though. So it's like, might as well go to AA. And that's what I did. I went to the Lambda group, and I sat in the front row, and at the end of the meeting, I got a desire chip, and I said, I haven't had a drink, but I am insane, and I need help. And those men and women at Lambda just loved me. They crowded around me, and they loved me. They invited me into their home. They invited me out to dinner with them afterwards. They called me. They included me. And I knew that I was not going to be alone in that moment. I knew that for that moment I was safe. But I'll tell you, for a good 6 months, I thought I was gearing up for a relapse. I'm working for the state of Texas still, and state agencies in Austin, they usually share buildings. And so I was working with this wonderful man who's a dear friend of mine named Anastasio A. And Anna and I would take walks around the building, and I'd smoke. It was 10 o'clock and 3 o'clock. That was my smoke break. And he'd walk with me, and I would talk about how horrible and stressful my life was. And he'd talk about how wonderful his life was, and this amazing new sponsor he was working with, and this weekly book study he was going to. And finally, one day, I just said, can I have your sponsor's phone number? I'd like to learn more. And then I called her. And I said, hi, my name's Brandon. You really don't know me. I'm 12 years sober, and I've been going to NA for a long time, but I just started going to AA, and I'm kind of crazy, and I heard you had a big book study, and I don't know the big book. Can I please come? Like that. And that was on a Monday at 5. And she said, sugar, I can't imagine any better reason for you to come to my book study. Get over here now. Meeting's at 7, but come now. And that's what I did. And that woman, and her name is Marty, and she ended up becoming my sponsor. She is still my sponsor today. And when I got around to asking her to sponsor me, she said, honey, I'd love to. I think we'd work some amazing steps together. And so when people ask me to sponsor them, I repeat that because I believe that, right? What happened is that my sponsor served kind of as a conduit, right? And got me connected to a power greater than myself. And I'm not saying that no one else could do that, but the way she did it worked for me and continues to work for me. And how we did that was we worked the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous through the first 164 pages as they're written in the big book. And that's how I take my sponsees through today. You know, there are a lot of different ways to work steps, and I've worked steps different ways, but that's pretty much stuck with me for the last 10, 11 years. And what I know really is I'm a one-trick pony, and so I'm just going to keep with what works. So it's been a great ride, right? Here are some things that have happened along the way. You know, I was 20 years old when I got sober. Adrian, you've got to tell me if I go over so I can wrap it up and be quiet. Y'all, when I was new and people with 20 years would start speaking, I'd be like, oh, God, here they go. The level of disrespect I had, you guys. Anyways, shameless. I was 20 years old when I got sober, and I was living with my mom and dad, right? Because I was a junkie. I couldn't hold down a job. I'm supposed to take care of myself or pay for anything. And I was also a former trust fund kid without a trust fund. And so I relied on my parents for everything when I got sober, right? And they moved away from Austin when I was still in college. How dare they? And then I had to get on, my own 2 feet, and that was difficult because I was unwilling to do it, right? And I didn't know what it meant to have to cook. Y'all, I had to start cooking for myself. Now, my friends today will tell you I am an amazing cook. That wasn't always the case. There was rice and beans for a long time, and that's all I knew to do. But they were really good rice and beans, y'all. I'm telling y'all, it was amazing. But, it's just like there came a point in time that my parents said no more. And I said, but please, 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 please. I said, okay, and that was like the game I played with them, right? And I played on their guilt, and I played on their fear of their child, living 500 miles away from them and going without. And then around 14 years sober, I let it slip to my sponsor that I asked my mother for money every month. I would ask her for money, and she'd put it in my account, and then I'd pay her back when I got paid on the first of the month. And my sponsor said, you did what? Oh, sugar. Now, when she calls me sugar, that's when I know I'm in trouble. Oh, sugar. That's going to stop today. And what ended up happening is I was instructed to make a list of everything I owed my parents financially. And I was instructed to ask them to make a list as well. And we were to have a meeting on finances. And my list did not matter. Their list was what was important. And their list was significantly more than mine. And I was instructed to make a payment arrangement with them. And what that arrangement looks like is $450 a month. Now, I've been doing that for a while, several years. I'll be paid off at the end of this year. In that process, I was talking to a really dear friend of mine last night. It revolutionized the relationship I have with my parents. See, what I was told, my parents had moved up to the Dallas area by then, and what I was told is I'm no longer allowed to ask my parents for money. I'm no longer allowed to come home, mow the yard, and expect them to slip $30 into my wallet. I'm no longer allowed to ask my father to put gas in my car before I leave. I'm to come home and to be a part of their family. And that's what I did for years, right? And then through a series of events, I did something I said I would never do in a million years. I moved to Dallas. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of people that, have lived in Dallas their whole life. I did not. And I was actually one of those people in Austin who said, I will never live in Dallas. 78704, it's not a zip code, it's a state of mind. Y'all, I never lived in South Austin a day in my life. I lived in the suburbs in Cedar Park. Okay, let's just be real. Sarah was there, she remembers. But I was just completely anti-moving to Dallas. And by the time it happened, what started out as kind of a whisper from God of, hey, you need to be closer to your mom and dad, became a roar. And in that process, I was laid off from a job, didn't really have that much of a safety net built up, so I had to move in with my mom and dad. Yikes. At 18 years sober. And I remember making jokes about how this is going to be like a really bad sitcom from the 90s. And you know what? I lived with them for a little over 18 months, and it was the absolute greatest time of my life. Now, my parents have a large house, so I stayed on one end, they stayed on the other. But they got to see that all the work I'd been doing was real, that it wasn't just lip service. My entire childhood growing up, I'd say, I'm sorry. And my mom would say, you've always said you're sorry. You need to do something different. See, she learned Al-Anon at a pretty young age because, children of alcoholics do that. And so they got to see that I had changed. And I had changed as a result of working the 12 steps. And as a result of working the 12 steps, I had a profound relationship with the God of my understanding and my mother and father and everyone I came in contact with, right? And that was an amazing, beautiful experience. And even today, I have an aunt and uncle up here, and I have a cousin that I'm really close to up here as well. And every Saturday night, we get together for dinner. That's what we do, right? And sometimes we'll go out to eat, and sometimes we'll just rotate whose house we're going to, and whoever's house we're going to has to cook. And I love that, y'all. I live for Saturday nights because it's family night for me, and I get to see the people I love dearly, right? And 2021 has not been good. That uncle is really sick with dementia, and he's in a care facility now. And that aunt is stage 4 cancer and going through chemotherapy. But I get to savor every week I spend with him. I go see that uncle once a week up in Louisville at his nursing home, and I spend as much time as I can with my aunt, who I'm so close to. She's got a nickname for me. She's been calling me for over 40 years, BT, right? And she's the only one that gets to call me that. And even in her phone, it just comes up as BT. And she's my Aunt Marcy, and I love that woman. And I just get to hold her hand and drive her home. I drove her home yesterday from the restaurant we had dinner at. And I'm grateful for those moments. So, mom and dad. 2 years ago, my mother was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and it was benign. But brain tumors are scary, and so they wanted to go in and remove the brain tumor. It's a craniotomy. And, you know. I got to have a real important moment of realizing that my mother, you know, this was all at UT Southwestern, my mother has some of the best medical help available to her. And my job was to be present for my father because his person was sick, right? And so I showed up for that man. And a week after the craniotomy, my mother she had been experiencing a blood clot that had gone undiagnosed for 5 days. And it was in her mesenteric artery. And those of you who don't know what a mesenteric artery is, it's in your abdomen. And when you have a blood clot that's 5 days old, it's going to cause a lot of damage. And it did. It almost killed my mother. I said goodbye to my mother that first night because the doctor told me to, and we didn't think she was going to make it. And what happened is throughout that evening, AAs from all over the country and even from Canada were calling me, telling me how much they loved me and how much they were praying for me. And I got to hold my dad's hand and just sit with him and hold space for that man because his person was really, really sick and he didn't know what he was going to do. He asked me if I would show him how to do online banking because he didn't know how to do it. He said, your mom always does that and I don't know anything about that stuff. So, you know, someone who used to steal money from them hand over fist, he gave his bank information too so I could show him how to pay bills online. What is that but a miracle of healing, y'all? And let me just tell you about my mama. I sat in that woman's hospital bed in ICU for 6 weeks and held her hand. She is home now. She is healthy. She is happy. She feels as though she has earned the right to say whatever she wants, and she damn well pleases. So if you're walking around McKinney, Texas, in a shopping mall without a mask on, she's going to say something to you because she's a retired nurse and she knows the facts. And it was a beautiful, beautiful experience. And in that process, my dad sent me a text one night. He just said, thank you for being you. Yo, that's an old redneck from Lufkin, Texas. Thank you for being you. It's the sweetest thing my father ever said to me. I've had to learn how to be a better friend. You know, I don't know about y'all, but I didn't have very good skills in that department, right, when I got here. And I've stumbled along the way many, many times. Back when I was living in Austin, there was this group I used to hang out with, right? And we were a little clique, and they had a name for us, and it was kind of disparaging, and I'm not going to repeat it up here because it wouldn't be appropriate, but it rhymes with core. And core was the second word, so that's all. It's like a sorority, you know? And really what happened is we all watched Mean Girls and wanted to be them. And that's what we were. We were the mean girls, right? And I can't talk about what they did, but what I can tell y'all is that I had indiscriminate sex with a lot of people, and I talked about a lot of people, and I gossiped about a lot of people, and I was mean to a lot of newcomers. And the problem is when you start hanging out with mean girls, you become a mean girl, right? Because one night at an Austin roundup, 2 of my closest friends are in my room saying, you've done this, and you've done this, and we don't trust you. And not only do we not trust you, I don't know if I can be friends with you anymore. And I got all up into that bitter morass of self-pity and self-righteous indignation, right? And wanted to turn it all around on them. And for 2 days I did, in my mind, right? And then come Tuesday morning, I'm texting with my sponsor, and I said, I think I've messed up. She said, what's going on? And I told her what had happened, and she said, sugar. Now y'all know, when Marty leads with sugar, we got a problem. Sugar, you got 10 minutes to get this on inventory and give me a call. We're gonna do a 5th step. And I did. And then I got to spend an hour in 6 and 7 looking at the exact nature of my wrongs, being very self-aware of the harm I have caused, and humbling asking the God of my understanding for removal on this stuff, right? And then I went about my day and I reached out to those 2 men and I asked them if I could speak with both of them individually and make direct amends, and they both said, absolutely not, we're done. And that's the way it goes sometimes, y'all. What I can tell you today is that 5 years later, Yeah. 5 years later, 6 years later, I have those amends written out, and I am ready and willing, if given the opportunity, to make direct amends to those two people. One of them is not sober anymore. Another one is, and he told me once after I moved up here, he's like, girl, that's all water under the bridge. So, it is what it is. What I know is that my behavior causes damage, right? My insincerity, my selfishness, my self-righteousness, it causes damage. And how can I be useful to others when that's going on? There was a newcomer that was kind of ensnarled up in our little hatefulness at that time, right? And poor guy, he was relapsing left and right, and he'd post these horrible pictures on Facebook. And we would just cackle and, ooh, And he got sober at the 24-Hour Club in Austin, Texas. And that's kind of like the 24-Hour Club here in Dallas. You got nowhere to go, you got that. And that girl, Michelle, who was my best friend way back when, was over there working there. And she said, let me call Brandon. He's over at Lambda. He'll be happy to come up and help you. And this is after all that fallout had happened, right? And this guy said, please don't call him. He's a part of that mean girl group, and I just can't. I'm scared of them. So how can I be of service to that next man when they're terrified of me? Y'all, we got to get God in real quick, right? So that summer, I had to have a profound experience in a foreign country. I went to Israel with it was a GLBTQ Jewish group, right? And we all went to Israel together. There were 12 of us. They called us the tribe, the disciples. That's 12. And, we did, we mainly went for Tel Aviv Pride, but we went around Israel and did the whole Jewish thing, right? And it was wonderful, and it was great. And my dear friend Nyla and I went a few days early and stayed with some friends of ours in Jerusalem. And, Jerusalem's very old and very religious. We're not. But we stayed in this neighborhood called Rehavia, and Rehavia is about a 20-minute walk to the Old City, and in the Old City is the Kotel, the Western Wall, right? And it is the last remaining wall of the Temple of Solomon. So it's also the holiest site for Jews in the world. And so the thing is, like when you're at the Western Wall, you write out a prayer and on paper and you fold it up and you put it in the cracks, right? And I did that, and I just held on to that wall, and I started praying, and somewhere along that way, something happened to me. I was no longer mad at those mean girls, and I was no longer hurt, and I no longer felt victimized, and I was no longer angry at that boy who had broken my heart however many years before, and I was just at peace and full of love. And since then, in the years since then, when I have wanted to get mad, get angry, reclaim that victimhood, I don't get to. I let go of that. That's on a piece of paper that got shoved in a wall and was later collected by a rabbi, and they get burned. So it was burned. Yeah, that's what happens. So, and you know what? I am so grateful for that entire experience and everything leading up to it and everything since then. So, moved to Dallas 4 years ago, and within 3 weeks it was home. Funny how that happens, and I can't imagine living anywhere else. And if I'm being completely honest, I don't ever want to live in Austin, Texas again, y'all. Sorry. Sarah knows, Sam knows. It's just, So, what's happened along the way is I have started a book study at my home, because that was one of the first things I wanted to do in my own place, was have a book study, right? And and I've realized in the last few days through prayer and meditation that I have caused harm in that book study. I have not had the commitment to having a weekly big book study in my home that I expect others to have who are in attendance. And so I've got some work to do around that and cleaning that up with the participants of that book study. And it's scary stuff, and I don't know why I just talked about it, but it happened, So at 22 years, we can still make mistakes, still clean stuff up, and thank God for that, right? I have some really good friends that have decided to go back out for whatever reason. And, 22 years later, it still hurts. It doesn't get better. It's always heartbreaking, and I'm always scared that something's going to happen and I'm not going to see them again. You know, we don't talk about this a whole lot in AA and Dallas, but my experience with relapse is that people die when they go out. I'm looking at Sam right now and I'm thinking of our friend Karen. You know, she thought she could handle it. She couldn't, you know? And there are so many other people along the way. And what I can do is ask God for the ability to be present when they come back, if they make it back, you know, and to not shame them. I think coming back from a relapse is the most courageous thing any one of us could do. I don't even know if I have that amount of courage in me. So if you're coming back in, welcome home. My God, you never have to do that again. Just sit down, stay with us. At the beginning of the year, actually New Year's Eve last year, there was my little core group and I decided, you know, we're like gonna, it was during COVID, none of us had a vaccine yet, so we're all on FaceTime. And we were like, let's make some intentions for the new year. Let's light candles and burn sage, and we did. And one of the things I made an intention about, not only for Jewish New Year, a few months before that, but for regular New Year, was to do the hard work, whatever that was, right? And when I was 10, 11 years old, getting bullied every day for being the gay kid who had a crush on Kirk Cameron, and playing with Barbie dolls, what I did was I went home and I started eating, you know? And I was able to escape that way. And that's stuff I don't talk about. And, you know, when I nowadays there's no good or bad, right? There are maladaptive behaviors that have become a habit. And this was a maladaptive behavior that had become a habit. And as a result of that, there have been health consequences, right? And this past year I've decided to have weight loss surgery, and that's a week from tomorrow. And I talk about that because I want to be accountable to my people, and y'all are my people, you know. And whatever happens as a result of that surgery, it is not because I'm just eating water chestnuts and dieting and exercising. That's not it, girl. They stapled up my stomach to this big, and that's it. And there's a lot of work I've got to do, right? My sponsor and I have been talking about this intensely for 6 months, about there's a lot of really hard spiritual work you've got to do, Brandon. And you know what? If I want to be happy, joyous, and free, regardless of whether I have surgery or not, there's a lot of hard spiritual work I'm going to have to do. So might as well do that to ensure I may be around a little bit longer than if I don't, right? And for me, it all comes back to the steps, right? That first step is all about surrender. And when I can get into surrender, my life gets real easy real quick. That struggle stops. And once I'm in that surrender, I can realize that I have a power greater than myself that is absolutely on my side, in my corner, the entire way. You know, that thing and how it works, you know, the A, B, and C, you know, where is it? Lord. C, God could and would if he were sought. That's a promise. If you read the big book, you may notice, and I encourage everyone to look for it, because my friend Ron B. in Austin talks about this. There's a promise on every page of the big book. Some of them are negative, but most are positive, right? God could and would if he were sought. That's my favorite promise in the entire big book, y'all. And so it's the oneness is on me. My job is to seek God in everything, right? When it comes to money, when it comes to career, when it comes to relationships and sex, when it comes to food and health and friendships, my job is to seek God and step out of the way. I am so grateful I've been able to do that. And my prayer is that not only I continue to do that, but that y'all do that as well, because I need y'all. You may not need me in this still, but I definitely need all of you. Thank you so much for